All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we are going deep on a huge GE year for classic rock, 1979.
You said it. I mean, think about it. 1979, punk is blowing up, disco's still hanging in there.
And right in the middle of it all,
These classic rock giants.
they're putting out some of the most iconic albums ever.
It's no wonder it still echoes today, right?
Seriously, the names alone, right? AC/DC, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, The Police, all in 79.
Like the universe just decided.
This is the year for rock and roll.
Exactly why we're here. To break it all down, we've got charts, articles, even some insider notes from rock fans.
But the main guide for this deep dive
The roadmap.
is Radio X's list, the 25 best classic rock albums of 1979.
Just looking at it chronologically, you can feel the energy building.
Yeah, from that post-punk edge all the way.
To this massive hard rock, experimental, the future of rock is being forged in these records.
Okay, so first up, January 79, Elvis Costello and the Attractions Armed Forces.
Oh, yeah.
Anyone else catch that post-punk vibe? Oliver's Army, still an anthem.
Costello, he had this way of tapping into what was going on, but with such smart lyrics and the music so well crafted. Punk, but so much more.
Totally. And then, bam, a few months later, Supertramp, Breakfast in America. Not your typical hard rock, but this thing became huge GE. I mean, come on, everyone knows that album cover.
It's funny because Supertramp wasn't known for being super, accessible, radio-friendly. But then this one had melodies, arrangements, even the lyrics, kind of satirical, but universal, longing, disillusionment. It just clicked.
And those sax solos, man, added a whole other thing you didn't hear in a lot of rock back then.
Totally. Plus, that production, every instrument shines through. It's seriously well made, and I think that's a big part of why it appealed to such a huge audience.
Spring rolls around, things are heating up. Van Halen the second drops in March.
Oh, yeah.
And this is where their sound really solidifies. Eddie Van Halen on guitar, just blowing minds.
Oh, Eddie, a true innovator. Two-handed tapping, dive bombs.
I've never heard anything like it. Like, he reinvented the instrument. Then, hot on their heels, Thin Lizzy, Black Rose,
Yeah.
Gary Moore on guitar, that Celtic influence coming through.
Such a cool blend, hard rock and Irish folk, mystical almost. Shows what Thin Lizzy could do, weaving those traditions together.
Then, bam, July hits, and we get a sonic tidal wave, AC/DC, Highway to Hell.
And this is where things get, interesting. Because not only is it iconic on its own, this is Bon Scott's last album.
Before his death.
Yeah, end of an era. Captured on record.
Talk about going out with a bang. Highway to Hell, Touch Too Much, Shot Down in Flames. Classics for a reason.
Yeah.
That raw rock and roll that AC/DC owned.
But there's this darkness, too, a sense of danger that runs through it.
And then just a month later, another heavy one, Led Zeppelin drops In Through the Outdoor.
The last studio album.
Before John Bonham's death the next year.
Right. It's amazing looking back how these albums feel, weighted,
In Through the Outdoor, it's interesting because it's more experimental, more introspective than some of the earlier stuff.
Yeah, they're using more keyboards, synthesizers, exploring different moods, pushing boundaries.
Tracks like Curtis Alhambra, All My Love, so different. And you feel a real vulnerability there, a searching.
And Bonham's drumming, incredible. You can feel the power, but also this incredible nuance, sensitivity, like he was pouring everything into it.
It's tough listening to both Highway to Hell and In Through the Outdoor without getting chills. Testaments to the power of rock, but also reminders of how fragile things are. But even with that heaviness, the music kept coming. And fall 79, some giants dropped career-defining work.
And what a fall. Big albums dropping left and right. 79 was building to something.
It was. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I want to go back to an album we touched on, Supertramp's Breakfast in America. We talked about its massive success, but I think it's worth digging into why it clicked with so many people.
Yeah, you're right. It's easy to write it off as just catchy pop rock, but there's more there. For one, the production, immaculate. Every instrument is so clear. You can hear those arrangements, all the detail.
Right. You can tell they put in the work, crafting the sound. But beyond that, the songwriting on Breakfast in America, it just works. It's smart. But you don't need a music degree to get it, Witty, but also hitting those universal feelings, longing, disillusionment.
And those sax solos, just irresistible. Added this whole other layer you just didn't hear in a lot of rock then.
Yeah, that was their thing. Speaking of pushing boundaries, though, we can't talk 79 without Pink Floyd, The Wall. It's not just an album, it's an experience.
It really is a sonic journey. Takes you right inside Pink's head, a rock star dealing with trauma, isolation, the pressures of fame. Dark, intense, but man, it's moving.
It stays with you. And musically, it's all over the place in the best way. You got those hard rockers like Another Brick in the Wall, Part 2, but then you get these quiet moments. Comfortably Numb, emotional roller coaster.
That's the genius, right? Roger Waters, his lyrics are just as strong as the music. He's tapping into something real about being human. Our need to connect, fear of being alone, struggles with, well, mental health. Still relevant today.
A soundtrack for the alienated soul. And those live shows, they actually built a wall.
Legendary. Theatrical, visually insane.
Okay, so we've got these albums pushing boundaries musically, conceptually, but what about the bands who were pushing rock itself in a new direction?
Well, the Blees got to be top of the list there. They were doing something different. That mix of rock, reggae, new wave. Sounded familiar, but new all at once.
Regatta de Blanc drops in October, bam, Message in a Bottle, Walking on the Moon, huge hits.
Nothing else sounded like that on the radio. And Sting's voice, so smooth, so distinct, totally different from a lot of the rock singers out there, just
A
shouting.
thinking person's pop band.
Yeah, they had the hooks, but also something to say. Politically aware, but they never got preachy. It's tough to pull that off.
And that tight sound, almost minimalist, they weren't afraid to let the music breathe, give it that groove.
Totally. Understood the power of restraint. And speaking of power, another band making a statement, The Clash. Double album, London Calling, in December, a punk masterpiece.
A sonic explosion. Punk, but also reggae, rockabilly, even jazz in there. A sprawling record that was raw and sophisticated all at once. They were making a statement.
Bold, ambitious, they weren't afraid to experiment, push those listeners. It wasn't just your three-chord punk.
London Calling. It still sounds as fresh today as it did back then.
A true classic. And to round out the year, The Pretenders, their debut, also December 79. Chrissy Hynde, that voice cutting through everything else.
Like a breath of fresh air, right?
Mm.
Raw honesty, vulnerability. And her songwriting, so sharp, so personal, she wasn't afraid to put it all out there.
Oh, and with style. They had that new wave feel, but also like a classic rock swagger.
No wonder they were huge in the early 80s. We've covered so much ground here. Albums pushing boundaries, musically, conceptually, even like on the charts.
Just scratch the surface, though, really.
Yeah.
79 was packed with great music.
It was. But before we wrap up, let's hear from you. Out of all these albums, which one do you think has held up the best over the years? Tell us why in the comments. We're back, and man, I'm still kind of reeling from all this incredible music. It's amazing how much we've covered, but there's always, more to dig into.
Always. But I think it's fitting to wrap things up with two albums that kind of represent the end of something. Like a bittersweet symphony,
You're talking AC/DC Highway to Hell and Led Zeppelin In Through the Outdoor, right? Wow, they came out so close together. Summer of 79.
Yeah, just weeks apart. And knowing what we know now about Bon Scott and John Bonham, both gone soon after, it adds this whole other layer, to the music.
Like you're listening with a different set of ears.
Exactly. Highway to Hell, AC/DC's big breakthrough, what made them superstars.
Yeah.
Raw, rebellious, just pure rock and roll energy.
And Bon Scott at his absolute best.
Yeah, his vocals on this just electrifying. You can hear why he became such an icon, why his death was so devastating for so many fans.
Highway to Hell, Touch Too Much, Shot Down in Flames. They're still on the radio all the time for a reason. That's the sound of rebellion, defiance. AC/DC owned it.
But there's this undercurrent of darkness too, danger. Some people even say Bon Scott was predicting his own, his fate.
In songs like Highway to Hell and If You Want Blood, it's a haunting thought.
Makes the music even more powerful though, knowing he poured everything into it.
It does.
And then just a few weeks later, Led Zeppelin, In Through the Outdoor. Different album, different vibe, but still carries that feeling of finality.
Yeah, In Through the Outdoor. It's them experimenting, getting introspective, more keyboards, synthesizers. Not the same bluesy hard rock, but still Led Zeppelin.
Shows another side of them pushing boundaries even after, achieving so much.
Cruz Alhambra, All My Love. Those songs are so different.
Yeah.
And you feel this vulnerability in them.
All My Love always gets to me. Just beautiful, heartbreaking. You can feel the emotion in Plant's voice. And it's one of their few songs with writing credits outside of Page and Plant. John Paul Jones co-wrote it.
And Bonham's drumming.
Phenomenal, powerful, nuanced, heartbreaking in retrospect.
It's like he was leaving it all out there.
Listening to both Highway to Hell and In Through the Outdoor back to back, it's an experience of the power of rock, but also how fragile things are.
Well said. Well, folks, that wraps up our deep dive into 1979. Punk, Hard rock, prog, everything in between.
Albums that pushed the limits, musically, conceptually, captured the spirit of a time.
But most of all, we've heard how music connects with us, takes us back, reminds us of these artists and their legacy.
That's what it's all about. So as you go back and listen to these albums, maybe discover some for the first time, we'll leave you with this.
How do you think the music of '79 still shapes what we hear today? Let us know in the comments. Until next time, keep the music playing.